All right. Are you cool doing a little bit of like,
100%.
because some of these questions are good and like, I feel like we could talk about them together a little bit.
Awesome.
Dude, people
engage with you, dude. It seems
and they
like,
ask good questions.
it seems like people really engage.
Yeah, they
Which is-
really. Well, dude,
it's bro, on your Instagram, people, it's cool that it's become a real hub for
that's
people
incredible.
who,
You have to try this.
what I'm saying is incredible.
That
or the
is
bi-
incredible, but you also have to try this.
The beer is incredible.
So this is a sparkling lime lager, which I've never even heard of.
that is good.
That's delightful. I'm sorry, I totally interrupted you, but don't you feel like it was sort of justified?
No, I don't.
I'm sorry.
I'm just kidding.
I'm sorry.
It was good.
But people do engage.
No, but it seems like people feel like it's a hub where they can like address this issue, and it's like an issue that people need to have addressed.
Well, yeah. I mean, one of the things that I've discovered in this whole process is that like people that feel this stuff don't feel like they can say it out loud. Like
Right.
people that grew up in church, but they're wondering about, like, is this stuff real? Is this true? Like, or if you have doubts about certain things, people by and large don't know where to go with that. And so someone like me comes out and decides to blow up his life and to publicly be like, well, guys, I'm gonna destroy I'm gonna destroy my life in public, but start saying things that maybe sound familiar to some people. Like,
Right.
I can't tell you how many people have written me and told me like, your story is my story. I mean, I'm not in a band. That's what they always say. But like
Right.
other than that, like,
Right.
you're describing me.
Right.
So I kind of wanted to talk about some issues that are on people's minds, and I asked earlier today, like, what are some details about deconstruction or my deconstruction, or maybe just like faith and processing that stuff in general. Mm-hmm. What would you like to hear about? And so, whenever I ask a question like that, people ask such good questions,
Whoa.
and this is why I'm sort of like. When people have this perception that like, oh, people on the internet are just stupid. I'm like, well, there is stupidity in life, so there is also stupidity on the internet. But there are also some really intelligent, thoughtful people in life, and those people also have the internet.
Right.
And so I've like in some of these questions, like I'm just like, wow, these are good questions.
Whoa.
So let's maybe like go through a few. Your Christian walk. That's not a question. What's your max deadlift? I actually thought that was funny.
Yes.
I thought that was funny.
Let's go.
It's a lot less than it was before COVID. I'll tell you that much because I haven't been lifting anything. Oh, okay. So how you broke the news to your family and close friends. The thought of this terrifies me. So I've heard this a ton.
Man.
So people who like are feeling some of these things, wondering, like, how do I tell my family about this?
Right.
So for me, it was a lot of like, it was a process and it wasn't perfect. I didn't do everything perfectly. But my general advice on this topic is like, when you're ready, be as honest as you can and as kind as you can. And if you do those two things, no matter how the process looks, like that's the best you can do, right?
Wow.
And so I have, and also like let people in on the process, like if my parents had heard about my sort of crisis of faith for the first time in that Instagram post, that would have been super hurtful.
Or on
Right?
Fox News.
Oh. Yeah, or that. Yeah, which could have happened. I mean, there were people that know me that saw it on Fox News first, and I'm great, cool.
Right.
But like, for people that you're close to, have one-on-one conversations. Let them in on the process. Let them ask questions. Be understanding if they're upset about it, because like this isn't just hard for you. This is hard for your family too.
Right.
If your family is Christian and you're saying you don't believe in God anymore, like they, in a lot of cases, literally worry about you burning in hell forever.
Right.
Now, you may not believe that that's real, and like I find that difficult to believe.
Right.
But your family may believe that, and like,
right.
if they have if you're a parent and you genuinely believe that your kid is gonna burn in hell, yeah, you're gonna be upset.
It's gonna be upsetting.
It's gonna be upsetting. So try to be as understanding as you possibly can, right?
Right.
And as loving as you can. And sometimes when people deconstruct faith or like walk away from Christianity or whatever, sometimes there's this sometimes there's an anger and a bitterness, because sometimes that is coming out of like a hurt or a wound that has been sustained or whatever. And you know, that stuff can be really legitimate. So I'm not criticizing people that have been wounded by Christians or the church or whatever.
Yeah.
But as much as you can, try and process this stuff with kindness, and recognize that like people in the church, most of them genuinely are doing the best they know how. And your family is most of the time doing the best they know how. You know, most people in life are doing the best that they know how. And they're not being difficult like for fun. Right? Like, give people the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
And be kind, and that, you know, that goes a long way. And be patient. Right. You know, understand that that people might have a hard time with it initially.
Yeah.
And they might just need time to adjust, and you know, and there's going to be other people that are just not prepared to be in your life anymore. Maybe friends that you discover that some distance forms, and that is just part of it, unfortunately.
Right.
But I would say to that, like, would you rather have that, or would you rather live the rest of your life pretending?
And that takes a toll on you, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a real toll.
Yeah. I think it's better to be really transparent about who you are and what you really believe, and then start there and work your way forward from there, and try and build relationships with people that understand you for who you really are and what you really believe. Yeah. And I think that's better than living a life where you're so in fear of losing these relationships that are based on conditions that, like, if you violate that condition, they're not going to be your friend anymore. Like,
right.
I don't know if that's a friendship that's worth fighting for in the end.
Dude, and wouldn't you say that, I mean, would you say that 'cause somebody told me once, like, I was going through a really hard time in my personal life, and they said, like, you're going to be surprised at who shows up for you.
Yes, I would agree.
You're going to be surprised. And has it been that way for you?
Yes.
Like, I mean, where you're like, people, even maybe hardcore conservative Christians, like, actually show up and give you grace. And they're like, hey, man, like, we're thinking about you, or even we're praying for you. But they say it in a way that makes you feel loved. Yeah. And so I wonder if that's the case.
You know who's become, I got invited on this show called Unbelievable with this guy named Justin Brierley, and he's a UK-based radio guy who does this show called Unbelievable. And on his show, he basically invites people that believe and people that don't believe to have a dialogue. And it's really, really great. And Justin's a very sharp dude. He actually also wrote a book called Unbelievable. He sent it to me. I read it. It's great. He's got such a C.S. Lewis perspective on life. And C.S. Lewis is my favorite author.
He's the man.
So, like, Justin Brierley is great. So Justin invited me to come on his show. I did. And I met on the show this guy, and it was all virtual or whatever, because thanks COVID. I would have loved a plane ticket to the UK.
Hey, come on, Justin.
But I don't think they would have flown me over for the show. I mean, I'm not that big time, Johnny.
Come on, Johnson.
But I met this guy, Sean McDowell, who is a Christian apologist and a professor, and he has a doctorate, and he's a speaker, teacher, author. And I sort of expected this, like, sort of back and forth exchange where, like, he was gonna, like, own me or whatever, and like, give me, like, here's the deal, boy. Like, I kind of expected that. Yeah. And he was so kind
Whoa.
And he listened to my story and he asked how I was doing. And when we went off air, he asked how my family was.
Whoa.
And I was like, dude, like this guy cares.
Right.
And he actually lives just up in Orange County. And so for a couple of weeks ago, we went, or like maybe last week, we went for a run together and like we met in person for the first time, and we're going to do it again in like a couple of weeks.
Nice.
And he's become like a surprise friend.
Right.
For me in all of this.
Wow.
And so that's a good example of like, I didn't see that coming, you know?
Right. What would you say to a family member or family in general who had, like, the flip side? If you give advice to somebody who's trying to break the news to family, what would you give to the family who has somebody in their life who they feel like is struggling, or has questions, or has doubts, or is deconstructing?
The best thing that you can do, I mean, arguing with them is not probably going to be very fruitful. And like telling them, hey, you need to watch this video, or hey, you need to read this book is probably not going to work, because they are wanting to go on a journey that leads them hopefully towards what's true. But initially, I actually don't think that's the motivation. Initially, the motivation is something about this is really bothering me and I've got to get away from it.
Right.
And so like I think for a lot of people when they walk away from Christianity, it doesn't start with a desire to be like, I don't think this is true. I think there's truth over there and I'm going to go run towards truth. I don't think that's how it starts. I think it starts with people being like, there's something about this that's traumatic for me and I got to get away from it.
Right.
And then it's only once they get away from it, then they start asking the question like, well, now what?
Right.
And I identify with that because I'm just like, once I separated myself from Christianity, I found myself asking the question like, okay, John, now what? How are you going to live your life? What are you going to value? What matters?
Right.
You know? And so then I started asking questions that I feel like caused me to start to look at Christianity in a new way and go like, well, I don't know that I believe what I used to believe, but there's something there.
Right.
And I discovered that like when I walk away from it, like I got rid of some things that I was happy to get rid of, but I also lost some things that like maybe I'm not ready to lose.
Right.
And so like for people that, you know, if you're someone who is a believer and you've got someone in your life that's saying they don't believe anymore, let them walk the journey.
Right. Because it's a journey, right?
It's a journey.
It's not like once they walk away, that's the end.
No.
Like it's
absolute best thing you can do is look them in the eye and say, I love you so much.
Whoa.
And I'm with you no matter what.
Wow.
That's the best thing you can do, because then you're not shoving any belief down their throat.
Right.
You're proving it. You know?
Whoa. Yes. Wow.
That's it, I think. Wow. We just spent 12 minutes on one question. Not a good start. Okay. But that was pretty, a lot of questions are along those lines. How is your wife and kids handling the process? So I'm lucky that Jess has been on this journey with me and has very similar feelings. She's also a pastor's kid. She, you know, she is from a very similar background to me, like charismatic churches and stuff like that. So for her, I feel like she's less of she's not going to read a bunch of nonfiction. You know, like if she's reading, she's going to read like a fiction book to just escape her mom life a little bit.
Mom life during COVID.
Yeah, it's no joke.
Dude.
So I feel like, you know, she checks in with me very frequently and she's like, hey, so like, what do you believe now? You know, but she's felt a lot of these same tensions and like, and asked a lot of the same questions about Christianity and our upbringing and stuff like that. And so she's been with me the whole way. And I'm so grateful for that, because I've heard so many stories of people who are like, oh yeah, like I find that I don't believe in God anymore, but my spouse still believes, and it's like a huge point of tension, which of course it is.
Totally.
Like, yeah.
Because
Small motorcycle, less than 200 cc's.
Going fast.
Going not that fast. Okay. Yeah, so all that to say, Jess is like totally with me in this, and I'm really, really grateful for that. Do you still listen to faith-based music? No.
Why?
I honestly like...
Do you listen to music at all?
Well, actually, that's a good question. Not very much. I listen to podcasts a lot. And...
Why don't you listen to music?
I mean, when we were setting all this stuff up, like, you were jamming some good songs, and it made me kind of go, like, maybe I should listen to music.
Yeah.
But, like...
Is it because it was your job?
Yeah. Yeah. I've had a few people mention that, like, hey, John, I notice when you come over, you don't, like, pick up a guitar and just jam. And I'm like, dude, I don't jam.
Yeah.
Like, music was my career.
Right.
And I don't know. I guess for me, like, music is still very tied up in that season of my life. So I actually, like, I still think I kind of have some hang-ups with that.
Really?
Yeah, I think so. Like...
It's understandable.
Yeah, I mean, I think... Yeah, I think music might be something that I get more into as I feel like I heal from this process a little more in the future, maybe. Whoa. I don't know.
Okay.
I will tell you one bit of music that I'm very familiar with is any song in Frozen or Frozen 2.
Maybe that's why.
Because my daughter, I'll say like, hey, what do you want to watch? And she'll be like, Anna, Elsa, Olaf, ah! Or she'll go like, Elsa, Anna, Olaf, let it go. And I'm like, yeah, and she, sings like, let it go, let it go. See, you don't have kids, you don't even know what I'm talking about.
No, I've never heard that song.
Every parent knows what I'm talking about right now. A lot of questions about marriage. How did it affect your marriage? So we've already sort of talked about that. Ooh, do you still believe religion is a good thing? So there are certain people who would probably call themselves atheists, all of them, who genuinely believe that religion is bad for humanity. I'm not one of those people. I feel like religion is... I mean, I find it really interesting that there's basically never been a society, in all of antiquity, there's basically no culture that rose up and didn't believe in God or gods of any kind. I find that interesting.
Very interesting.
So, like, every culture believed in either a god or multiple gods.
Right.
So why is that? And so, like, I think that you, as a society, you discover that like there's certain things that seem to make your life better, right? So, like, there's a certain way of behaving in your society that seems better than other ways you could behave.
Right.
And if you abstract that out, right, you can start to think about, like, well, what's the best version of that? And the best version of that is your God or your gods. If there's different, personalities, like the Greek gods, all, like the god of war and the god of love, like they're like all these different personalities that are sort of the every basic idea taken to its highest form was sort of the idea of what God was, And it seems to me that from generation to generation, religion has been how we pass down our values, how we teach our children how to be in the world. And I feel like that's the function that religion has served as long as humans could have abstract thought, right? Like, actually, anthropologically, there's this really interesting sociological idea where basically, like, you can only intimately know like about 150 people.
Whoa.
So if you want to know which human beings you can trust, you can only, if you're basing that entirely just on I trust the people I know, you can only really do that with about 150 people, and then the cohesiveness of the society starts to break down. So before religion, all like human tribes were small, and they'd get to a certain point and they'd break off. But once they had the ability to tell stories and to have abstract thought and to create mythology, then they could create things that a group of people could collectively believe. And those beliefs would bring the society, hold the society together, even if it grew beyond the point where you can know everyone individually.
Right.
And so mythology and religion and stories were the thing that allowed, societies to grow beyond 150 people. And historically, there's a very strong, there's a lot of evidence to indicate that Homo sapiens were the first hominids to be able to do that. And even though Homo sapiens are smaller and weaker than a lot of the other variants of hominids, we seemed to wipe out every other version of human beings whenever we got to where they were. So, like when Homo sapiens got from Africa to Europe, they seemed to, like the Neanderthals died out. And so you have to kind of ask the question, like with the case of the Neanderthals, it's like, well, if Homo sapiens were smaller and weaker than Neanderthals, then why were Homo sapiens able to conquer Neanderthals? And the theory is that basically Homo sapiens had language, had the ability to tell stories, had the ability to create these societies that are bigger than 150 people, and they could work together and they could cohere as a unit.
Right.
And so to think that religion has no value or that it's harmful is sort of rejecting the very thing that holds societies together.
Right.
And so I kind of don't think that religion has no value. That's a separate question from, do you think that it's literally true?
Right.
So I do find myself wondering, like, is it possible that God is not real, but believing in God is useful?
I feel like we want to either sort of be dualistic and say it's either good or bad, but it's like there can be good parts and there can be bad parts of the same thing.
Well, and I think a lot of Christians wonder, like, what happens to a society when we completely abandon the idea of God and do things get really bad? And I wonder that too. And I'm not one of these people that goes like, oh yeah, we'd be better off if we all just agreed that God's not real. I actually think there's a real possibility that God might not be real, but that believing that he's not real might be destructive.
Totally.
Well,
in like the USSR and Russia and all Marxist philosophies based on like that God's not real. And if you think,
I think the word religion has a bad rap.
Totally.
I mean, I remember growing up in the church and always hearing this phrase, it's not religion, it's relationship. And maybe that was like more of a charismatic thing. Maybe you didn't grow up. Did you grow up hearing anything like that?
I've never heard
that's
that.
Interesting. That was like that was like a cornerstone of the sort of faith that I was brought up in. And what they mean by that is that all those stuffy churches over there, they believe in religion. We do not believe in religion. We believe that the most important thing is a relationship with God or a relationship with Jesus. Now, let's pick that apart for a second. Firstly, it's a reactionary statement, right? Because it's saying like, it's starting with a negative. Like, it's not religion because it's indicating that it sort of indicates that like we believe there's something wrong with religion. Or we believe that religion is missing the point. Or we believe that religion is not the most important thing you could hold dear, right?
That relationship's more important.
That relationship is more important. It's not religion, it's relationship. The problem with that for me, and I think a lot of say Catholics or Presbyterians or Episcopalians or more traditional Christians, the problem that they would say is that well, then at that point, it becomes just about your sort of floaty emotional relationship with Jesus and the Holy Spirit and all this stuff. And then it becomes unanchored from a tradition, and people can sort of make whatever they want out of it, which is a problem. And like one of the things I've learned in this process is like I had a 90-minute call with a Catholic bishop last week. I've gotten to talk to some really, really brilliant people.
Wow.
And what I mean, I've learned recently that basically like whenever there's a question about theology, like in Protestant churches, like what we both grew up in, the answer is basically like, well, what does the Bible say? Right? Like go back to the Bible. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard the phrase, well, the Bible is clear. And I'm like, well, the Bible's anything but freaking clear on certain things.
Right.
But the Catholic approach to that is like, yeah, there's some issues that the Bible is actually really not clear on. And so on those issues, they're called cuestiones disputantes, which means disputed questions. And so it's basically like it goes to the magisterium. Do you know what the magisterium is?
No.
It's freaking amazing. I mean, like, it sounds amazing, right?
It's
the
a cool word,
It's
dude.
a cool word.
Yeah.
So the magisterium is basically the Pope and a collection of bishops, like high, like, you know, people very educated, very steeped in the tradition of Catholicism. And they basically decide, as Catholics, this is what we believe theologically. And so any questions in Scripture that come up, the magisterium basically just go like, well, it's this. And then all Catholics are supposed to just go like, okay, the matter is settled.
Right.
Which is so not how Protestants do it.
Right.
All right, Protestants are like, no, the Bible is clear. And then everyone disagrees on exactly how it's clear. And they all think it's clear, but they think it's clear the way they think it's clear.
Right.
So
there's like 30,000 denominations.
Yeah, there's 30,000 denominations. So it's not clear.
No.
There's that motorcycle again. So the Catholics, the way they hold their tradition together is they go like, no. We don't individually get to decide what the interpretation of the Scripture is. The magisterium decides, and then we follow.
Wow.
And I said to the bishop, I was like, you know, maybe this is my Protestant upbringing talking, but like, doesn't that kind of sound a little bit like, don't you worry your pretty little head about it. Like we'll do the thinking, and you just leave it to us. And he was like, yeah, I could see that criticism, but he's like, at some point, like someone has to make a decision about what things mean, and like it'll just, if everyone can just decide for themselves, it's just chaos. And he used this analogy of an umpire in baseball. He's like, in baseball you have an umpire, and he makes calls now and then. Now he's not spending the whole game going this, but in critical moments he says out or strike.
Okay.
And without an umpire, baseball would just be chaos.
Right.
And I was like, wow, that makes actually a lot of sense. like it just made me go like, okay, like that's a perspective, Catholicism, that I did not grow up in. And I was like,
Right.
well, that is interesting.
Right.
And that's a totally different approach to the problem of interpreting Scripture than I was raised in.
Right.
And that's really interesting to me. What passages of the Bible have been helpful to you? There's two that have been really on my mind recently. The first one is the story of Jacob wrestling the angel. If you remember that story? So basically Jacob, the Bible, like the way that the Bible tells the story, it's sort of weird. Like it's like it doesn't like have an intro. It's just sort of like Jacob and his family went here. The family went off on their own. Jacob was alone, and then a stranger came and wrestled with him all night. And I'm like, well, just like you just went right there. So the stranger is God or represents God. I don't exactly know how literal this is, but wrestles with him all night and injures his hip, but Jacob will not let him go and says, I want you to bless me. And so God basically, says, eventually he goes, okay, I'll give you my blessing. And he gives him a new name, and he gives them the name of Israel. Wow. And the name of Israel means, struggle. And the very name of Israel is talking about the struggle that Jacob had with God. And he's wrestling with God.
Right.
And he's wounded. He hurt his hip. And so he walked away with a blessing, and he also walked away with a limp. And that's significant to me because it seems to me that like wrestling with these questions of God is freaking hard.
Bro.
And it is not straightforward.
Right.
And it's not obvious. And anyone who thinks, oh, it's just simple. It's like, well, it just means you haven't really read about it and you haven't really thought about it. Like,
it can hurt you.
Yes. And it does.
Right.
And so that's why, like, I kind of go, like, when I speak to someone who's a Christian and I sense that limp and I sense that sort of like, oh man, they believe, but they had to fight for it.
Right.
Those people I find really interesting. And when they talk about their faith, I listen. But people without the limp, people who just act like it's the easiest thing in the world, it's like, and then people who say stuff to me like, bro, how could you not believe? Blah, 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 blah. Like, anyone with the limp who believes is like, yeah, I understand why you could not believe.
Right.
You know?
Because, like, they went through it all night.
Yeah.
I mean, even if the night's figurative, it's like what people call like the dark night of the soul. It's
Mother
like,
Teresa.
It can be a long time. Where it's
Yeah.
like you're struggling for a while.
Yeah.
You know, before finally the sun comes up and like it's over.
Yeah.
But even then you're still limping.
Yep.
Like Jacob limped for the rest of his life, presumably, you know?
So that story I really love, and I love the story of Thomas when the disciple Thomas, when he came face to face with the resurrected Jesus, he still didn't believe. And so Jesus let him touch his hands, right? And the significance of that to me is like, I mean, this speaks to me because of where I'm at. Like,
right.
Like, Jesus could have said, I'm right in front of you. Like,
idiot.
Like, yeah, like, how could you not believe? Thomas needs something more. Like, he's asking Jesus, like, I see you in front of me, but I still don't believe. Like, can you come closer? Can you make yourself more real to me in some way? And Jesus could have said, like, screw you. Like, everybody else believes, like, that I show up to everyone else, and they're like, okay, cool, you're Jesus, got it.
Right.
You know, how could you not believe? Jesus doesn't respond that way. He comes closer. And he lets Thomas touch him. And he does say it would be better if you could believe without needing this.
Right.
But he's kind to Thomas anyway, you know?
Right.
And he takes that extra step and shows himself to Thomas in like an additional way. And one of the things I also think, I'm just like realizing this now, is that Thomas gets to experience the resurrected Jesus in a way that no one else does because he doubted.
Wow.
He got to see he got to experience Jesus in an additional way that he wouldn't have gotten to experience if he hadn't doubted. So his doubt actually led him to an increased, like a
further place.
A further place in experiencing Jesus.
Right.
And that like gives me so much hope, because I'm just like, look, I've been doubting God. I wonder about the reality of all this stuff, but I continue to go like, God, if you're there, like, I want to know.
Right.
And if you're real, and if you are who, you know, I was raised to believe that you are, then like, please show yourself and like come closer.
Right.
And so the story of Thomas is like really meaningful to me, because it's like indicates that sort of a desire is something that maybe God has compassion for.
And it's a huge encouragement. I mean, it's a huge encouragement for that reason, but also, like, Thomas is the only one out of all the people there who has that problem.
Yeah.
You know? And that's the thing about deconstructing, is not everybody gets there.
Yeah.
Not everybody has the problems that you might have. Mm-hmm. Not everybody asks the same questions that you might ask. And it's often hard to understand. Like, don't you guys see this? Like, why isn't this a problem for you? Like, it's a problem for me, you know? And I mean, that story is an encouragement to say like that, you know, in that moment, like Jesus was, all of his attention was on Thomas. He was interacting with him and not anybody else, because Thomas was the one to say like, I need something else. Like what everybody else is fine with just believing, like I'm not. And
I mean, I identify with that.
Right.
So those are sort of two Bible stories and scriptures that are really meaningful to me right now. What was the final straw? Okay, I can answer this one. A big one for me was I went to Uganda. And I think I've told you this story. I went to Uganda and I did a documentary about this people group called the Batwa. And they're an indigenous tribe in southwestern Uganda. They lived in these mountains that also are the home of the silverback gorilla. And the silverback gorillas are endangered, and so the Ugandan government created this gorilla sanctuary and set basically these mountains aside specifically for the gorillas and pushed out anyone that lived in there. Well, this tribe, the Batwa, they had lived there for generations. This was like they were living off the land. This is just how they lived. And so they got pushed out. They had nowhere to go. They had no money. They had no jobs. They had no skills. They didn't know how to interact in like a modern environment. And so they ended up just squatting on whatever land they could. And a lot of the adults died, leaving a lot of orphaned children. And I mean like children alone, naked, crying in the forest, being found by random people. Whoa. Like this is the kind of stuff that was going on. So I was over there with this organization called Hope Ministries Uganda, and they have an orphanage where they house, clothe, and feed and educate 250 Batwa children, and they also do a lot of work with the Batwa communities in the area, who are living in just like tremendous poverty. But the stuff I saw and the stories I heard from them, I mean, like, and I had just recently become a father, and I was seeing these situations where children the same ages as my kids were suffering in just like unbelievable ways. I mean, like, we're talking like there's so many children that like there'll be a 4-year-old raising a 2-year-old, because that's the 4-year-old is the only person the 2-year-old has. Also, about half of the Batwa children don't survive to the age of 5.
Wow. Man.
So like, and these are like kids the same age as my kids.
Right.
And so I'm over there like, and I'm looking in the eyes of these kids and going like, there's absolutely no reason that like this couldn't be my son. Like this absolutely could be my son.
Right.
And my son just happened to be lucky enough to be born in America.
Right.
This kid was born here. He didn't ask to be born here, and here he is.
Whoa.
You know, this is the situation he's in. And I just had a really hard time reconciling the idea of an all-loving and all-powerful God with that kind of suffering. And I know there's like philosophical answers to the sort of question of like, if God is good, why is there suffering?
Right.
But when you're confronted with that kind of thing, it's like the philosophical answers, they don't work. Right. They just don't feel satisfying.
Right.
And I came back from that, and I remember just being like, I don't see how God can be real with what I've seen over there. I can't believe that God could be powerful and good and create a world where this is possible. And then like, let's go further and like, you know, I've read about Auschwitz, and like, I mean, some of the stuff that they did there is like so horrible. It's like unspeakable, right. But you also do need to speak it, because we need to remember that this stuff happened.
Right.
You know, like we're talking about like children being baked in like ovens and like people being forced to dig their own graves and then being buried in them. And, you know, like just unimaginable suffering. For some reason, the horrifying things that happen to children, that's hard for me. When I was in Uganda, actually I flew in and out of Rwanda, and so I went to the genocide memorial there, and I learned about the Rwanda genocide that happened in '94.
Wow.
So there's these two people groups, the Tutsi and the Hutu, and they basically like, there's a ton of political stuff to do with it, but basically like one people group decided to wipe out the other. And at one point, a bunch of refugees crowded into like a soccer field, and there was like something like 100,000 of them or something like that. I can't remember the exact numbers. And they were attacked and basically like hacked to bits by machetes. And there was nowhere for them to go, so that they had no route of escape. And they had been watching their family members killed methodically for weeks, and this was like the culmination of it. And they as a group, I guess, sort of realized that there was just nothing they could do, and they stopped running. And so they stood there, and 100,000 people basically got hacked to death by machetes.
Whoa.
So you think a few things there. Like I remember walking away from that being like, okay, like if I'm God, okay, this is where things get interesting with Christianity. If you're a Christian and you believe that God still intervenes today, like if you believe that God does miracles, or if he still speaks, or if he like intervenes, you know, like answers prayers, for instance, like that would be a moment that you would think God would intervene.
Right.
You know, children suffering and dying in Auschwitz. That would be a moment you'd think God would be like, yeah, I'm going to step in here.
Right.
All the stuff I saw in Uganda, that would be a moment that I was like, yeah, you would think God would step in here. And so my conclusion was sort of like, man, I just don't think he's there. Because if he was there, he would. And it comes back to this idea of a loving father, right? Like, I think about my kids. No way would I let them endure any of that stuff. I don't care what, like, plans I had or what, like, I thought I was setting in motion for, you know, like, if I'm a loving father and I see my son or my daughter getting hacked to bits by a machete, or, you know, crying and starving naked and alone in the forest, or, you know, like being put in a concentration camp and put in a freaking oven, I'm not going to stand by and do nothing.
Well, like in the Bible, it says if if your son asks for bread, are you going to give him a stone? You know?
Yeah.
It's like, no, and you're somebody you're like a sinful person. Like, how much more is God gonna not, treat his children that way?
And so I look at that and I'm like, the only conclusion I can draw, at that point, I felt like the only conclusion I could draw was that God is not real. And that was where it broke for me. Just seeing suffering and learning about just the tremendous amount of suffering in the world. That was when I was like, I'm done. I'm done. I can't believe this anymore.
Yeah.
And I do feel like on some level, I've sort of returned from that a little bit. Like I find myself coming back to being open to the idea that God is there, but I still don't understand this part.
Right.
You know, the suffering, I still don't understand. I don't understand why. I don't understand why there is. And I totally understand the philosophical argument of like free will is necessary in order to have relationship. And if God wants a relationship with us, then we have to be able to choose him or not choose him. And not choosing God and not choosing goodness means choosing evil. And that leads to all these other things. Like, I understand the philosophical argument.
Right.
But I still have to take a step back and I go like, God, if he's real and he created the universe, he created the possibility of all of this. And you can't tell me this is the best he could have done. You know?
Right.
But maybe I just don't understand.
Yeah. I mean, it just seems like, and that's a question people have been struggling with for a long time.
Yes. And every Christian apologist I've ever talked to, they all say that the problem of evil is the most substantial problem confronting the sort of arguments for the existence of God.
Yeah. I hope that, like, because it's so ubiquitous and, like you said, everybody struggles with it, that, like, you're giving advice to people who are going through this, or advice to family members who have people going through this, and it, like, with something like that, it's like the natural response is to, when somebody says, like, I just don't know how I can deal with that, is to, like, well, here's an explanation.
Yeah.
And it's like, instead, like, there just needs to be space for it.
This is a good place to feel like to conclude this conversation, I feel like. Because I feel like I've discovered in this process and thinking about it that my biggest issue is it's not even whether God exists. It's not whether Jesus was God. It's not biblical inerrancy, although those are all issues. My biggest issue is the culture of certainty that I grew up in Christianity, and that I've experienced throughout my life in Christianity, where people talk about things as if they're sure, things that they can't be sure of. But there's a culture of collective certainty that we all just agree that we're sure about this.
Right.
And when the whole culture agrees that like, hey, this is what we believe as a culture, and you can't believe anything else, because then you're outside, then you're not in the group. It's like, well, then we start to let ourselves believe all kinds of things, and those things can get more and more elaborate, and that's when it turns into dogma, right? And
there's not space for questions. It's like, if you have a question, here's the answer.
Right. And it's this desire to always have an immediate answer to everything. I mean, I even remember in Christian music, like songs, if you wrote a song, here's the formula for a Christian song. You have to start with tension. You have to start with, like, oh, there's something wrong in the world or something wrong in my heart. But then you have to resolve it. And that all has to happen in 3.5 minutes. Also, the chorus probably should hit by 45 seconds. Like, it's like there's all these little rules. And I remember, like, so some friends of mine in a band called 10th Avenue North, they wrote a song called Worn, which is one of my favorite songs in Christian music because it does not resolve. The song is basically just saying, I'm tired, I'm worn, my heart is heavy. And the chorus says, let God, it's speaking to God, let me know redemption wins. Let me know this story ends. Like it's asking God to bring peace and to bring resolution and to bring comfort. But it's not ever saying, I know that God is going to do this.
Right.
It's saying, like, God, like, I'm in the tension, and right now it's unresolved. And I don't see resolution right now. And it never, like, the song never gets there.
Whoa.
And Mike, the singer, has even told me that, like, there were a number of people that they work with that were like, yeah, they wanted him to rewrite the last chorus and be like, now I see redemption wins. Now I see blah, 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 blah. And be like, have some certainty at the end. And Mike pushed back and was like, no, because a lot of people feel like they're not living in certainty yet.
Right.
And that's so true. And, I think that song did relatively well, but I think probably it would have been more successful if they had put the stupid bow on it.
Right.
And that's a problem. Because Christian culture wants everything to be certain. What's the first thing we say as Christians when we hear people are suffering? Like, oh, we'll pray for you.
Right.
And it's like, that might be true and that might be a meaningful thing to say, but it also sort of gets you out of having to sit in it with them.
Right.
And I think when someone's hurting, the most meaningful thing you can do is sit in it with them and just be like, yeah, this is awful.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
this is awful and I'm sorry and I can't fix it.
No.
But I'm here with you and I'm going to sit with you in it. And that's like, you know, I think a lot about like the difference between blockbuster Hollywood movies and indie movies, right? Blockbuster Hollywood movies, you have a big problem, then you have a resolution, you have a big payoff, right? Indie movies, a lot of the best ones, they actually take you deeper into the pain, right? And they don't resolve. Like one of my favorite movies is The Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. And in that movie, they're basically grappling, this couple is grappling with the idea that like, hey, if we stay together, like you're gonna get annoyed with me. And my habits that you think are cute right now, you're not gonna think are cute later. And they get to see what that's gonna look like for them. And they realize that like, that when you love someone, it involves opening yourself up to pain and being vulnerable and you're going to be hurt. And all the stuff that goes along with being in a relationship. And at the end of all of that stuff, they look at all of it and they go like, yeah, this is gonna happen. And then they look at each other and they just go, okay. And that's the resolution. There's no bow.
Right.
It's like the resolution is it's integrating the pain instead of trying to explain it away.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that like indie movies do really well that blockbusters like tend to not want to do.
Right.
But you know,
well, and blockbusters are more successful. People pay to see
because they want to believe
the resolution.
They want to believe that the triumphant resolution is possible. You know,
and I think that's important for us to understand about ourselves is just that we all want that. Like when someone is going through something hard around us, like we want to resolve it for them.
Yep. I actually feel like the whole indie movie, blockbuster movie thing, at the point I'm at right now, I actually believe we have so much to learn from other faith traditions outside of Christianity. So like one of my favorite is Buddhism. And I actually like lots of stuff to do with Buddhism is stuff that you can incorporate into your life, even if you're, you know, like a Christian, actually. Like,
really?
Like, I think a lot of Buddhism has to do with a philosophy of being and sort of like a way of being in the world and a way of organizing your mind and a way of like, and sure, if you get down deep into Buddhism, there's some stuff that like is like, okay, that's like a bit weird, you know, but on the surface, there's some stuff that we can learn. And so much about Buddhism is their approach is all about how do we deal with suffering. And Buddhism reminds me of an indie movie in that way, because it sort of takes you deeper into it, right? It doesn't try to negate the suffering. It goes, you know, it's sort of, Buddhism sort of says like, well, pain is inevitable in life, but suffering is not.
Wow.
And so the Buddhist point of view is basically like, the only reason that you suffer is because you've become attached to things. You've attached yourself to certain ideas and certain expectations. And those expectations and those ideas were let down. And so you were hurt. And so Buddhism sort of teaches you a sort of flexibility in life to go like, you know, like I would like another pretzel, but I don't have to have another pretzel.
I would like another beer.
Anyway, but I do think when it comes to suffering, one of the things that I get the most frustrated with Christian culture is the discomfort with discomfort.
Right.
Where it's like when someone is suffering, it makes everyone incredibly uncomfortable.
Right.
And sometimes Christians will just want to resolve that as quickly as possible and be like, oh, you're suffering. Maybe God is teaching you something in this time. And they're looking for they're looking to put a nice twist on a horrible thing.
Right.
And I'm just like, just let it be a horrible thing.
Right.
You don't have to put a bow on it.
Right.
Like, there is suffering, there is pain in this life.
Right.
And like, you don't have to try and resolve everything with this quick, pretty thing, you know?
Right. And that's to me why I think, from what I've seen, like your story has resonated with people, is because people are secretly going through this struggle because they don't feel safe to come out and say, here's what I'm going through. Because if they do, it's going to be like the response from people around them is that's not okay. Like, let's fix it.
Yeah.
Let's fix it. And
Yep.
it's understandable that the people say that way, because like they're saying, I don't want you to go to hell.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like it's a pure, the motivation from the people around them comes from a pure place, I think, which is like, it's actually, in our view, it's not okay for you to have questions, because then you'll go to hell.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, if you have questions, let's fix it.
Yeah.
Like, let's fix it right away.
Mm-hmm.
And so I understand the motivation, but the problem is it makes it worse, right? Because then it's like, you know, not being able to express yourself, that's oppression. Like, not being able to like just say, listen, here's how I'm feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And for it to just be understood. Like, I just need somebody to understand, this is what's going on with me. And so it's great, I think, that you've been able to like foster like a community of where it's just okay to say like, this is what I'm going through, and for it to just be okay, you know?
Yeah, and I don't know where it's going exactly, but I mean, the thing I think more than anything that's important is to have conversations with people that are different than you. To be genuinely open-minded and to listen. And to ask the question, how can I seek the best good for myself now, and also the best good for myself in the future, and also the best good for the people around me, and also the best good for the people around those people, you know, and like the ever expanding circle of goodness. Like, how can I live my life in a way that plays that out?
Right.
And there's a lot, I feel like, that a lot of religions have to say about that. And I happen to come from a Christian tradition, and I actually feel like Christianity has a lot of worthwhile things to say about that. And so I find myself in this really like tricky spot where I'm like, I'm not sure what I actually believe literally about God,
Right.
or Jesus, but I do feel like there are things about Christianity that are good.
Right.
And I have no desire to attack Christianity as like a worldview, you know, or as like a way of, maybe not worldview, but like as like a mode of being in the world.
Right.
You know,
Right.
Christianity properly expressed seems to be extremely compassionate and loving and graceful.
Wow.
And there are plenty of Christians that don't act it out that way. And that's a problem. but I think it doesn't change the fact that if you look at all the various beliefs that you could hold, there's a lot about Christianity that would lead you to a life that's fulfilling and good. And so what I find is that like I'm interested in understanding why that is. And you know, is it because Christianity is like a really good story that seems to touch on things that are true about who we are as human beings? Or is it because it's actually literally true? And I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But
Right.
those are the questions I'm asking, and those are the questions that I want to keep asking for myself and for anyone who's interested. So, well, our pretzels aren't gone, but our beer is.
It is. I was wondering if we were going to finish the pretzels.
The pretzels interfere with the conversation a little more than the beer does.
I mean, I was working on the pretzels.
Well, all right. We're going to cheers with empty.
Let's do it.
All right.